All right, so today we are going way back, like back to the 13th century, for a story that sounds completely made up. A pig put on trial for murder. Yep, it's one of history's absolute weirdest tales. But as we're about to find out, the real story is even more fascinating than the legend. So this is the version you've probably heard, right? It even pops up in serious history books. I mean, it just paints this wild picture of the medieval world, a world so different from ours that an animal could be considered a murderer, stand trial, and then get executed like a human criminal. It's a shocking image, and honestly, it's one that really sticks with you. And that is the million-dollar question. Whenever you hear a story from history that seems that perfectly strange, that bizarre, it's always worth asking, where did this actually come from? Are we really getting the full story? Or has something been, added or maybe lost over hundreds of years of retelling? Okay, so let's start with the legend itself, the popular version. The whole idea of an animal being put on trial feels so ridiculous to us, so irrational, that it kind of fits perfectly with this modern idea we have that we're way more enlightened than people from the past. This story is basically Exhibit A for anyone who wants to prove just how bizarre the Middle Ages were. You see it everywhere. Articles, books, documentaries, trotted out as this definitive proof of a superstitious and just plain harsh legal system. But here's the thing. A good story isn't always good history. So how did this specific tale become so famous? To figure that out, we have to become historical detectives. We've got to trace this story all the way back to its source. And it turns out, pretty much everything we think we know comes from one very influential book. And here he is. Meet the main character in our little investigation. This book by E.P. Evans was a huge deal when it came out. In it, he claims that back in 1266, a pig convicted of having eaten a child was publicly burned by order of the monks of St. Genevieve. His dramatic, almost theatrical retelling is the one that just caught fire. And you can see the domino effect here, right? After Evans published his book, historians and writers just kept citing him, and then citing the people who cited him, often without ever going back to check his original sources. So his version became the version, repeated so many times that it just hardened into what everyone accepted as fact. All right, time to put on our detective hats. If E.P. Evans is the one who made the story famous, who was his source? And who was their source? We have to follow the paper trail all the way back to the very beginning. You know that game of telephone you played as a kid? Well, that's pretty much what happened here. You can see it laid out. Modern historians like Joyce Salisbury are citing Evans from 1906. Evans, in turn, was citing a French historian named Jean Leboeuf from way back in 1757. And Leboeuf? He was citing the original source, just a tiny little note from an unnamed writer around the year 1300. That's 4 steps across more than 700 years. And here's where it gets really interesting. As we peel back each of these layers, something incredible happens. All the details that make this a dramatic trial, the conviction, the court order, the whole idea of a legal process, they just start to disappear. The story gets simpler and simpler, and the trial seems to vanish into thin air. So this whole thing really boils down to that one oldest source we have. And to understand it, we have to crack the code of the language it was written in. We have to see just how easy it is to misinterpret a few words from a completely different time. Okay, this is it. This is ground zero. This single line of medieval French is the tiny seed from which this entire giant myth grew. It basically says the pig, quote, was burned in the Cour Sainte Geneviève at Fontenay. Now, everything, and I mean everything, hinges on the meaning of 2 little words in there, cour and mere. And boom, here is the entire misunderstanding laid bare. Later historians, like Evans, seem to have read cour and thought, oh, a court of law. They saw mere, which is a version of mire, and thought judge or mayor. But in 13th century France, cour most often just meant a courtyard or a village square. And a mayor wasn't an elected official, he was a steward, basically a land administrator for the local lord, in this case, the Abbey of St. Genevieve. And just like that, the entire scene in our heads just totally changes, right? There's no judge in robes, no courtroom drama. The original record is actually saying that the pig was burned in a public square, and the event was overseen by a guy named Aubert, who was just the local property manager. The dramatic trial has completely evaporated. Okay, so if it wasn't a trial, what in the world was going on? Why on earth would you publicly burn a pig in the middle of town after it had killed a child? Now that we've kind of cleared away the myth, we can look at what most likely actually happened. Well, there are several really practical and, for the time, culturally significant reasons this happened. First up, the obvious one, public safety. A pig that's attacked and killed a human is a dangerous animal, period. It needed to be put down. Second, and this is a huge deal for the medieval mindset, is ritual purification. An animal that had consumed human flesh was seen as deeply spiritually impure. Burning was a way to cleanse that corruption. And finally, think about the trauma for the village. A public event like this could have been a way for the community to process its horror and its grief together. So when you put it all together, the event at Fontenay was probably a mix of practical administration and community ritual. It was about restoring a sense of order and purity after a terrible tragedy, not about deciding if a pig was legally guilty of a crime. You might be thinking, okay, but why spend all this time on one single pig from the 1200s? Because this story is a perfect case study in how we think about the past and just how easily a good story can become a historical fact. The truth is, A Pig on Trial is just a fantastic story. It's dramatic, it's weird, and it perfectly confirms that stereotype many of us have of the Middle Ages as this bizarre, barbaric, superstitious time. We accepted it so easily because it just fit a narrative we were already comfortable with. We never thought to question it. And I love this quote from the historian Colin Frank, who's the one who actually did all this detective work. It really sums it all up. By getting the story right, we're not just correcting some obscure historical footnote. We're painting a more accurate and, frankly, a more human picture of the past. The pig wasn't a criminal, it was just a tragic animal in the middle of a human tragedy. And that's really the big question I want to leave you with. The story of the Fontenay pig is such a powerful reminder to always, always question where our information comes from. It really makes you wonder, what other facts that we all take for granted are just really good stories, waiting for someone to follow the paper trail?